involving Caitlin Clark have fans furious.
In one of the most talked about games of the season, all eyes were on Caitlin Clark, but what fans didn't expect was how badly her own coach, Stephanie White, would be dragged for how she used her. Now, after a brutal loss against the Las Vegas Aces, critics are saying Stephanie didn't just lose the game, she may have lost the locker room too. Was it strategic failure or something deeper? It was supposed to be the game that showed how far the Indiana Fever had come. A marquee matchup against the reigning champions, the Las Vegas Aces, packed stands, national coverage. Cameras zoomed in on Caitlin Clark. It had all the makings of a statement game, but instead it became something,
Especially with how the game played out in the fourth quarter. Was Caitlin Clark set up to fail?
entirely different. Not because of a loss, but because of how that loss unfolded. And at the center of the firestorm now is head coach Stephanie White. When the final buzzer sounded, it wasn't just the scoreboard that stung. It was the sight of Caitlin Clark walking off the court, exhausted, frustrated, and some said visibly upset. The Fever had been outclassed and outplayed, but the controversy brewing had nothing to do with the opponent. It had everything to do with how Stephanie White used her most valuable player, and whether her coaching decisions in that game went beyond poor strategy into something far more damaging. Clark played nearly the entire game, logging high minutes against one of the most physical, elite defensive units in the league. She was constantly double-teamed, chased off screens, and hounded on the perimeter. Aces coach Becky Hammon had a clear game plan: wear her down early and force the Fever to make someone else beat them. But from the very first quarter, it was obvious Stephanie White had no counterpunch. Instead of adjusting the offense or managing Clark's load, White leaned into the chaos. Clark brought the ball up on nearly every possession. She fought through picks, initiated offense, and was expected to be both playmaker and scorer against one of the best defensive teams in WNBA history. The problem? She had almost no help, and the rotations, questionable at best. Critics immediately pointed to White's lack of in-game adjustments. There was no variation in offensive sets to create space for Clark.
The Fever couldn't pull away. That missed opportunity set the stage for what would later become a complete collapse.
No design plays to get her easier looks. No staggered rotations to help her catch a breath while keeping the game close. Instead, Clark was run into the ground, and the Aces knew it. By the third quarter, she was visibly fatigued, her body language tense. Still, White kept her in. And when she finally sat late in the fourth, the Fever were down 20. The backlash was immediate. Fans took to social media in droves, many expressing concern and outrage. What exactly was the plan tonight? One tweet read, "Clark was clearly exhausted and getting targeted, and Stephanie White just watched it happen." Another user posted a slowed-down clip of Clark being hit on a screen, followed by a sharp side-eye at the bench. "Look at her face. She's done." Post-game interviews didn't help. When asked about Clark's usage and the overall approach against Las Vegas, White gave a vague response. "We had to lean on our leaders. We trust Caitlin to handle pressure, and she's one of the toughest players I've coached." It sounded like a vote of confidence, but to many, it felt like deflection. Toughness isn't the same as endurance. And leadership doesn't mean a rookie should be treated like a veteran workhorse. The story quickly spread beyond Twitter.
She committed key turnovers late in the fourth quarter, right when the game was tied. That shift allowed the Aces to take over, and the Fever couldn't recover. Even though others played well,
Sports shows the next morning lit up with hot takes. One analyst said bluntly, "Stephanie White is playing Caitlin Clark like a rental. There's no long-term thinking here, just survival mode." Another panel debated whether Clark was being sacrificed for ticket sales and media buzz. When a coach stops protecting their star, it's not about basketball anymore. One said, "It's about pressure." And that's where things started getting real, behind the scenes. Sources close to the Fever began leaking murmurs of internal tension. Some staffers reportedly questioned the rotation decisions weeks ago, concerned that Clark was being asked to do too much too fast. She leads the team in minutes, touches, and shot attempts. For a rookie, that's not just unusual, it's risky. Not just for her body, but for team morale. Veteran players, according to whispers, had expressed frustration that the offense had become so Clark-centric. Not because they didn't respect her, but because they felt it through off-team chemistry. It's not that she shouldn't lead, one source said. It's that the whole game is being funneled through her even when she's clearly running on empty. That concern boiled over in the Aces game. And now Stephanie White is facing the heat. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what Caitlin Clark represents. She's not just a rookie, she's a movement. She brought a flood of new fans to the WNBA. Her college career broke records, filled arenas, and turned every game into an event. When she got drafted, it wasn't just a pick, it was an investment. TV deals, jersey sales, merchandise, appearances. Every move she makes is watched by millions. And that's where the danger comes in. Because when someone becomes bigger than the game, the people responsible for managing their development coaches, execs, marketing teams often stop thinking like basketball minds. They start thinking like brand managers. Stephanie White, to her credit, has coached at multiple levels. She understands pressure. But many are now asking whether she's letting that pressure dictate her decisions. Did she leave Clark in too long to chase a miracle comeback? Did she keep feeding her the ball because that's what the cameras wanted? Or did she simply misread the moment and forget that protecting a player isn't weakness, it's wisdom? Even some former players are speaking out. One WNBA veteran tweeted, "It's the coach's job to pull you when you need it. Matter if you're a star or a rookie."
Stephanie White came into this season talking big about strategy, but when it mattered most, she had nothing. While Becky Hammon made smart halftime adjustments that shut down Aaliyah Boston, White just stood there, arms crossed, no changes. The same broken offense kept running.
Rookie, someone needs to be the adult in the room. Another posted, "We've seen this before. Burnout by year 2. Protect your players. Period." As all of this unfolded, Caitlin Clark remained professional. She answered post-game questions with poise, refusing to criticize anyone. "They're a great team," she said of the Aces. "I've got to be better. We've all got to be better. But it starts with me." It was leadership, the kind people. Praise her for, but even in her restraint, fans could see the strain. The spark was still there, but dimmed, worn out. So now the questions don't stop with that one game. They bleed into everything else. Is Caitlin being developed or drained? Is Stephanie White in over her head, or just reacting to an impossible level of scrutiny? And most importantly, can this relationship between star player and head coach survive the pressure of public expectations, internal locker room politics, and a growing sense that something isn't quite right? Because if it doesn't, the consequences won't just be a few losses. It could be a full collapse of trust, of chemistry, of momentum. And if the Fever let that happen, it won't be on the rookie. It'll be on the people who were supposed to know better. The heat surrounding Stephanie White wasn't just confined to the court anymore. After the Indiana Fevers defeated the hands of the Las Vegas Aces, and more importantly, after her decision to keep Caitlin Clark on the floor far beyond reason, the real war began in the media. Sports radio shows across the country devoted entire segments to what some were calling a reckless coaching decision. Pundits, fans, and former pros weren't arguing about the loss itself. They were dissecting how Clark had been used like a human, battering, overcharged, and burned out. And as that conversation gained traction, it stopped being about basketball strategy. It became about responsibility. The first to jump into the firestorm was a well-known WNBA analyst who said bluntly during a national panel, "This isn't about winning anymore. This is about branding. Caitlin Clark is being played like she's invincible, and the one person who's supposed to manage that is Stephanie White. She's failing. That statement struck a chord because, for the first time, someone had vocalized what a lot of people were starting to feel. Caitlin Clark, the most important rookie the WNBA had seen in years, wasn't being protected. She was being marketed hard. The critics weren't claiming Clark didn't belong on the court or that she hadn't earned her playing time. Her talent was undeniable, but what they were questioning was how her talent was being managed. Was her heavy usage strategic or performative? Adding fuel to the fire were the game analytics. Data released after the match showed Clark had the highest usage rate on the team, the most touches, the most defensive pressure applied against her, and the fewest breaks relative to those stats. In simple terms, she did more work under more stress with less rest than almost anyone else on the court that night. And the person who allowed that wasn't a teammate. It was the coach. Behind closed doors, this wasn't going unnoticed either. WNBA insiders began reporting a noticeable shift in the Indiana Fever's locker room energy. Some players, reportedly already walking a fine line of respect with Clark due to the intense media attention she brought, were now growing resentful. Not toward Caitlin herself, but toward the way she was being used, featured, and prioritized. One anonymous player told a local reporter, "We're all professionals. We all want to win. But when everything runs through one player, especially a rookie, and it isn't working, someone's got to step back and reassess." And
the
right
second
now,
half was a
nobody's doing
disaster
that.
for Indiana. Everything fell apart. The lead vanished, and the Aces took full control. Asia Wilson came alive and dropped 18 points just in the second half.
The implication wasn't lost. The someone was clearly Stephanie White. Meanwhile, fans weren't silent either. On social media, hashtags like #ProtectCaitlin, #StephanieWhat, and #FeverFatigue started trending. Some fans called for a minute's restriction on Clark, not because she was underperforming, but because they feared burnout. Others began questioning whether White was out of her depth, handling a high-pressure roster loaded with media expectations. The most vocal fans didn't blame Caitlin. In fact, many came to her defense, suggesting that she was being overplayed for ticket sales and media optics, not because it was what was best for her or the team. She's not a machine. One fan wrote in a viral tweet, "She's 22, getting beat up every night. And now she's catching blame for a coach's poor rotation decisions. Protect your star." Even more pressing was the mounting speculation about White's future with the team, while it was far too early in the season for front office firings to happen. League sources reported that upper management was already having internal discussions about how to support Clark's development better, both physically and mentally, and whether White's coaching style was aligned with that vision. It wasn't just the media and fans putting pressure on White. It was the broader basketball community. Prominent retired players began weighing in on podcasts and sports panels. One former MVP said, "Listen, I've seen coaches ride rookies into the ground. That's not development, that's desperation." And desperation is exactly how the Fever's last few games looked. Instead of building a well-rounded system around Clark's strengths, the team was asking her to do everything: score, pass, create, defend. With every tough matchup, the gap between expectation and execution was widening. The coach wasn't adapting. The system wasn't evolving. Worse, there were now signs of visible friction during games. In one matchup following the Aces game, cameras caught Clark exchanging a sharp word with White during a timeout. It wasn't a screaming match, nothing dramatic, but the expression on Clark's face was unmistakable.
Caitlin Clark struggled from the three-point
line,
line, going just 1 of 10. Still, she finished with 19 points and 11 assists.
Physically but mentally worn down. Former coaches watching from the outside noticed, too. Look, One said on a post-game analysis stream, "Is the look of a player who feels unheard." And that brings us to the real issue here. Communication, whether or not Stephanie White is a capable coach, is not in question. Her history, her accolades, and her knowledge of the game are well established. But the current moment demands more than X's and O's. It demands emotional intelligence, player management, and awareness of the long-term picture. Clark isn't just another athlete. She's a generational talent and the face of a league looking to break through into the mainstream. If White doesn't pivot, she could not only risk Clark's development, but damage. The team culture permanently. Reports from league insiders suggest that Fever front office members have already stepped in privately to reset expectations for the coaching staff. Those meetings reportedly emphasize managing player health, diversifying the offense, and ensuring veterans feel empowered, not sidelined. In short, the message was, build a team, not a Clark dependency. Clark herself, ever the pro, hasn't spoken negatively about her coach. But even her diplomacy can't hide the reality. She's being asked to carry too much. And while she may never say it publicly, people around her are beginning to push for changes in how she's deployed, rested, and supported. It all begs the question, how does Stephanie White respond? If she doubles down, she risks isolating herself further. She makes the necessary adjustments, limiting minutes, feuding plays around other contributors, improving player rotations. She could restore balance, but the window is shrinking. Every game, every quarter, every substitution is now under a microscope. The Fever don't need a superstar. They'll already have one. What they need is a coach who understands how to build something sustainable around her, not just for the season, but for the future of the franchise. Because the truth is, the WNBA is in a moment of historic transition. It's more fans, more visibility, more expectations. And Caitlin Clark is right in the middle of it. How she's coached now will echo for years, not just in stats, but in how future stars are treated. And if Stephanie White can't rise to meet that moment, someone else will. The firestorm surrounding Stephanie White wasn't just a bad week of press, it was a turning point. After weeks of growing criticism, questions about her leadership had shifted from sports debate to organizational concern. The conversation had changed. This wasn't just about game strategy or fatigue. It was about whether White was the right leader to guide the most high-profile rookie in WNBA history through the storm she never asked for but was now stuck inside. The Indiana Fever had banked their future on Caitlin Clark, not just her skills, but her marketability, her impact on viewership, and her ability to pull a franchise out of irrelevance and into the spotlight. The gamble had paid off in some ways. The arenas were fuller, the jerseys were flying off shelves, networks were calling. But on the court, the team was still struggling. And when the most visible player in the league is being overworked and publicly criticized while her coach fumbles basic rotations, the front office doesn't stay quiet for long. Sources inside the organization began leaking details that were hard to ignore. There had already been internal meetings to review team culture and decision-making. Upper management wasn't just disappointed in the recent stretch of losses, they were concerned about how quickly the season's narrative had spiraled out of control. Stephanie White was said to be on notice, and while there was no official statement about her job security, the tone had clearly shifted from patience to pressure. One executive reportedly stated, "This isn't just a rebuild anymore. This is a product with national visibility. I can't afford to keep mishandling it." Meanwhile, the locker room dynamic continued to evolve. After the high-profile loss to the Aces and the visible strain on Clark, several veteran players began speaking more openly in private about their frustrations. Not necessarily with Clark herself, but with how she was being centered in a way that made the rest of the team feel like background characters. It was becoming increasingly obvious that the Clark-centric offense wasn't just burning her out, it was freezing others out. Shooters weren't getting touches. Veterans with playoff experience weren't being trusted in late-game scenarios. And the result was chemistry that felt fragile, forced, and uncomfortable. Some teammates reportedly pulled Clark aside in a private conversation, not to confront her, but to clarify. "We're with you, but we've got to find balance." That moment, insiders said, was a key turning point in how Clark started approaching her role, not just as a scorer or playmaker, but as a true leader. Caitlin, for all the pressure on her, had continued to carry herself with professionalism. But now, something had changed. She started deferring more, trusting her teammates more. Even during blowouts, she encouraged more. She passed up good shots for great ones. On the surface, it looked like strategy. But behind the scenes, it was intentional leadership. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Commentators praised Clark for her maturity, figuring it out. One analyst said during a live broadcast, "She's not just adjusting to the league, she's adjusting to being the player everyone watches." It's not easy. But even as Clark adapted, the focus turned back to Stephanie White in the next few games. Her substitutions were under a microscope. When Clark was finally given a proper fourth-quarter rest in one game, fans and analysts applauded, not because she was benched, but because it felt like common sense was finally returning. But it was too little. It's too late for some. Speculation began swirling that if the Fever didn't significantly improve their win percentage before mid-season, changes at the coaching level were not only possible, they were likely. A former assistant coach with experience developing young guards was reportedly being monitored as a potential interim option. The whispers were growing louder. If White couldn't pivot and protect her star, someone else would. The national media didn't let up. Either ESPN, Bleacher Report, and The Athletic all published features dissecting Clark's workload, the Fever's dysfunction, and the pressure on White to evolve. The tone had changed from questioning to urgency. One article was titled, "Is Stephanie White coaching for her job or just buying time?" The piece laid it out plainly. Clark's rookie contract had for years, but her patience wouldn't last forever. And if the franchise fumbled this opportunity, it might lose more than just games. It might lose her trust entirely. All of this placed Clark in an even more difficult position. She hadn't asked for any of it. Not the fame, not the media circus, not the leg in your back expectations. She'd simply played her game. But now, with every decision her coach made, her name was at the center of it all, whether or not she wanted to. She had to lead, and she had to lead without being accused of pulling strings. To her credit, she walked that tightrope with grace. In interviews, she praised her teammates. She took responsibility for mistakes. She kept her focus on winning. But the truth was, every time she was overused. Every time White failed to create a system that didn't leave her stranded in double teams. It felt like a betrayal of the player development arc she deserved. At one point, Clark reportedly had a private meeting with Fever front office members not to demand a coaching change, but to discuss strategy, growth, and long-term team direction. It was a mature move, and according to sources, it was, well received. One executive said, "She wants to win. She wants everyone to be better. She's not in this for the spotlight. She's in it for the game." That level of self-awareness is rare, especially in a rookie. But Caitlin Clark isn't a typical rookie. And the Fever, if they're paying attention, should know that now, as the season hits a critical point, all eyes are on what happens next. Will Stephanie White adjust her system, restore balance, and prove she can guide this team through the storm? Or will she continue to rely too heavily on Clark and lose both the locker room and the fans? If a change does come, and it very well might, the Fever have a chance to reset. Not just the offense, but the culture. A culture where Clark can thrive without burning out. A culture where other players feel seen, heard, and trusted. A culture that looks beyond jersey sales and focuses on the kind of team chemistry that builds real contenders. Because in the end, this isn't just about one coach or even one season. It's about how the WNBA handles the rise of a generational star in an era of unprecedented attention. Will the league protect its future, or will it burn her out before she even hits her prime? Stephanie White's job may not survive the answer to that question, but Caitlin Clark will. Caitlin Clark didn't ask to carry a franchise, but here she is, leading under pressure most rookies will never know. So now the question isn't just about wins or losses. It's about leadership, coaching, protection. Did Stephanie White drop the ball? Or is this just what growth in the spotlight looks like? Drop your take in the comments. Should the Fever stick it out or shake things up? And if you want real talk beyond the box score, hit that like, share, and follow. Because here, we don't just cover the plays, we unpack the pressure behind them.